Lion appears at official ceremony with Traoré, and population interprets it as divine sign. The blazing July sun cast long shadows across the Place de la Nation in Ouagadougou, as thousands of Burkinabés gathered for the annual Independence Day celebration. This year's ceremony carried special significance, marking not only the country's liberation from colonial rule, but also the first anniversary of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's rise to power. Colorful traditional fabrics created a sea of vibrant patterns as citizens from across the nation converged on the capital to witness what promised to be an unprecedented celebration of sovereignty and self-determination. The massive crowd extended far beyond the official viewing areas, with families camping overnight to secure prime positions for the festivities. Street vendors weaved through the assembled masses, selling flags, traditional foods, and commemorative items bearing Traoré's image alongside symbols of Burkinabé identity. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation and national pride, as citizens prepared to celebrate both their historical independence and their renewed sense of autonomous leadership. On the raised platform constructed for the occasion, President Traoré stood reviewing his prepared remarks one final time. At 34, he had become the embodiment of a new generation of African leadership, young, principled, and uncompromising in his commitment to genuine independence from foreign interference. His simple military uniform contrasted sharply with the elaborate ceremonial dress favored by previous leaders, reflecting his administration's emphasis on substance over symbolism. The ceremony's program included traditional performances, military displays, and speeches from various dignitaries, but the highlight would be Traoré's address to the nation. His words would be broadcast live across Burkina Faso and transmitted throughout Francophone Africa, where other nations watched with interest to see how this young leader would articulate his vision for post-colonial African development. As the formal proceedings began, the crowd's energy was palpable. Children waved miniature flags while adults sang traditional songs celebrating freedom and independence. The military band played stirring renditions of the national anthem, and traditional dancers performed elaborate choreographed sequences that told the story of Burkina Faso's journey from colonial subjugation to sovereign nationhood. The security arrangements for the event were extensive but discreet, with uniformed and plainclothes officers positioned throughout the crowd and surrounding areas. Intelligence reports had indicated no specific threats, but the symbolic importance of the celebration made it a high-priority security event. Despite these precautions, the atmosphere remained relaxed and festive, reflecting the genuine popular support for the occasion. International observers and media representatives occupied designated areas, documenting an event that had attracted attention far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The ceremony represented more than a national celebration. It had become a symbol of changing attitudes towards sovereignty and self-determination across Africa, particularly in nations that had recently experienced similar political transitions. Among the crowd, traditional leaders and spiritual figures held positions of honor, their presence lending cultural authenticity to the political celebration. These elders, representing various ethnic groups and spiritual traditions, had endorsed Traoré's leadership as legitimate within traditional frameworks of authority, providing crucial cultural validation for his modern political movement. The president's security detail maintained careful watch over the proceedings while allowing maximum public access to their leader. This balance between protection and accessibility had become a hallmark of Traoré's administration, reflecting his commitment to remaining connected to ordinary citizens despite the obvious risks such exposure entailed. As the afternoon progressed and the moment for Traoré's address approached, a subtle change in the crowd's energy became apparent. People began pointing toward the edges of the ceremonial area, where movement in the surrounding vegetation had caught their attention. Security personnel initially assumed this represented late-arriving spectators attempting to find viewing positions, but closer inspection revealed something far more extraordinary. From the acacia trees that bordered the Place de la Nation, a magnificent male lion emerged into full view of the assembled crowd. The animal moved with unhurried confidence, its golden mane catching the sunlight as it surveyed the massive gathering with apparent curiosity rather than aggression. The sight was so unexpected and unprecedented that many observers initially assumed it was part of the planned ceremonial program. However, the reaction of security personnel and wildlife experts in the crowd quickly made clear that this was an unplanned and potentially dangerous development. Lions had not been seen in Ouagadougou's urban areas for decades, and the presence of such a large predator at a public gathering created immediate safety concerns that could have resulted in panic and casualties. Yet remarkably, the crowd's initial reaction was not fear, but awe. Rather than fleeing or screaming, thousands of people fell silent and watched with fascination as the lion continued its leisurely survey of the ceremony. The animal's calm demeanor and the timing of its appearance, precisely as their president prepared to address the nation, struck many observers as profoundly significant, rather than merely coincidental. Traditional leaders among the crowd immediately began interpreting the lion's appearance through cultural and spiritual framework that gave the moment deep symbolic meaning. In many African traditions, lions represent courage, leadership, and divine approval, making their presence at important political events a sign of legitimacy and blessing from ancestral spirits. The lion's majestic presence commanded absolute attention as it moved slowly along the perimeter of the ceremonial area. Security personnel faced an unprecedented challenge: how to manage a potentially dangerous wild animal while avoiding panic among thousands of gathered citizens. Radio communications crackled with urgent consultations between wildlife experts, security commanders, and government officials trying to develop an appropriate response to this extraordinary situation. President Traoré, observing the unfolding situation from the elevated platform, made a decision that would define not only this moment, but his entire presidency. Rather than allowing security forces to potentially harm the animal or evacuate the celebration, he stepped forward to the edge of the platform and gestured for calm among both his security detail and the crowd. "My fellow Burkinabé," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the amplification system, "we witness something remarkable today. Let us observe with respect and without fear." Atata. His calm authority had an immediate stabilizing effect on the crowd, preventing the panic that could have resulted in stampede casualties. More importantly, his decision to interpret the lion's presence as worthy of respect rather than elimination resonated deeply with traditional cultural values that emphasized harmony between humans and nature. The lion, seemingly unperturbed by the massive human gathering, continued its unhurried exploration of the ceremonial space. Wildlife experts among the crowd noted that the animal showed none of the signs of distress or aggression that might be expected from a large predator surrounded by thousands of people. Instead, it moved with calm confidence, occasionally pausing to observe specific sections of the crowd with apparent interest. Traditional leaders and spiritual figures in the audience began sharing their interpretations of the event's significance with those around them. In Mossi tradition, lions were considered messengers of the ancestors, their appearance at important ceremonies indicating divine approval or disapproval of human actions. The animal's peaceful demeanor suggested blessing rather than warning, leading many to view its presence as validation of Traoré's leadership. Similar interpretations emerged from other cultural traditions represented in the crowd. Fulani elders spoke of lions as symbols of righteous authority, while Bobo spiritual leaders referenced ancient stories of lions appearing to acknowledge legitimate kings. The convergence of these various cultural interpretations created a powerful consensus that the lion's presence carried profound spiritual significance. Media representatives struggled to document the unprecedented scene while processing its implications for their reporting. International journalists, many of whom lacked understanding of local cultural contexts, focused primarily on the security aspects of having a dangerous predator at a public event. However, African media outlets immediately recognized the deeper cultural and political significance of what they were witnessing. The lion's behavior continued to defy conventional expectations as it approached closer to the official platform where President Traoré stood. Rather than displaying territorial aggression or predatory interest, the animal seemed almost curious about the human leader who had commanded its attention through his calm response to its presence. Security snipers, positioned on surrounding buildings with clear shots at the lion, received explicit orders from Traoré himself not to fire unless the animal displayed clear aggressive behavior toward the crowd. This decision, while increasing personal risk, demonstrated the president's commitment to respecting both the animal and the cultural significance his people were attributing to its appearance. The crowd's energy had transformed from festive celebration to reverent observation, as thousands of people watched this unprecedented interaction between their political leader and a symbol of natural power. Many began quietly reciting traditional prayers or songs associated with spiritual encounters, creating a low murmur of devotional activity that added to the moment's sacred atmosphere. Children, initially frightened by the large predator, began to relax as they observed their parents' calm acceptance of the situation. Some pointed excitedly at the lion while others asked questions about its significance, creating teachable moments about cultural traditions and respect for nature that would be remembered for generations. The president's security detail faced the challenging task of protecting their principal, while respecting his explicit instructions not to harm the lion unless absolutely necessary. Their positioning shifted to create protective barriers while maintaining the openness that allowed this remarkable encounter to continue without unnecessary escalation. As the lion drew within 30 meters of the platform, it paused and appeared to focus its attention directly on President Traoré. The two figures, human political leader and natural predator, regarded each other across the ceremonial space in a moment that seemed to suspend normal time and conventional understanding of appropriate boundaries between civilization and wilderness. The silence among the crowd was now complete, with thousands of people holding their breath as they witnessed what many would later describe as a moment of recognition between their chosen leader and a representative of the natural world that had blessed their land for millennia before the arrival of colonial disruption. The extraordinary moment of mutual recognition between President Traoré and the lion stretched across seconds that felt like hours to the thousands of witnesses. The big cat's golden eyes remained fixed on the young leader, while its powerful body maintained the relaxed posture of an animal, completely at ease, despite being surrounded by humanity. This unprecedented scene challenged every assumption about the boundaries between political ceremony and natural wonder. President Traoré, demonstrating the leadership qualities that had brought him to power, slowly descended from the elevated platform toward ground level. His security detail moved to intercept this dangerous decision, but he waved them back with the quiet authority that had become his signature during moments of crisis. "If this lion wished us harm," he said quietly to his concerned guards, "it would have acted already. We must show respect for what our ancestors would recognize as a sacred encounter." His words reflected deep understanding of the cultural currents flowing through the crowd, where traditional interpretations of the lion's behavior were rapidly coalescing into a shared narrative of divine approval for his leadership. By acknowledging these spiritual dimensions rather than dismissing them as superstition, Traoré demonstrated the cultural intelligence that had made him beloved among ordinary Burkinabé. The lion, observing the president's approach, made a decision that wildlife experts would struggle to explain for years afterward. Rather than retreating or displaying defensive behavior, the magnificent animal took several steps forward, reducing the distance between itself and the human leader to less than 20 meters, close enough for detailed mutual observation, but far enough to avoid triggering defensive responses from either species. Traditional leaders in the crowd began sharing urgent whispered consultations about the significance of this development. According to multiple cultural traditions, a lion's willingness to approach a human leader without aggression indicated recognition of legitimate authority. More remarkably, the animal's calm acceptance of the president's approach suggested mutual respect between natural and political power. The crowd's energy had transformed completely from the festive celebration that had characterized the earlier ceremony. What was unfolding before them transcended normal political theater to become something approaching religious experience. Many people began quietly weeping, overwhelmed by witnessing what they interpreted as divine validation of their hopes for authentic African leadership. Media cameras captured every moment of this unprecedented encounter, though the technical documentation could hardly convey the spiritual electricity that permeated the atmosphere. International news outlets would struggle to contextualize images of a president calmly facing a wild lion for audiences unfamiliar with African cultural framework that made such moments deeply meaningful, rather than simply dangerous. The lion's next action would be discussed and analyzed for decades in theological and anthropological circles. The powerful predator, having established visual contact with President Traoré, slowly lowered its massive head in what appeared to be a gesture of acknowledgement or respect. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable, a deliberate lowering of the head while maintaining eye contact, followed by a brief pause before the lion raised its head again. For the thousands of witnesses, this gesture confirmed their emerging interpretation of the encounter as spiritually significant. In many African traditions, such behavior from a lion toward a human leader would be understood as ancestral endorsement of political authority. The timing, during an independence celebration dedicated to sovereignty and self-determination, made the symbolism even more powerful. President Traoré responded to the lion's gesture with his own sign of respect, placing his hand over his heart and offering a slight bow toward the magnificent animal. This acknowledgement of mutual recognition created a moment of profound symbolic communion between human leadership and natural authority that transcended normal political discourse. The lion, having completed what seemed to be its intended interaction, began moving slowly toward the edge of the ceremonial area. Its departure was as unhurried and dignified as its arrival, with the animal showing no signs of distress or urgency. Instead, it moved with the calm confidence of a creature that had accomplished its purpose and was now returning to its natural environment. Security personnel carefully monitored the lion's withdrawal while maintaining their commitment to avoiding any action that might harm the animal unless public safety absolutely required intervention. The crowd parted respectfully as the lion approached the perimeter, creating clear pathways for its departure while maintaining the reverent atmosphere that had characterized the entire encounter. As the lion disappeared back into the acacia trees from which it had emerged, the crowd remained silent for several long minutes. The profound nature of what they had witnessed required time for processing and integration. Many people continued staring at the spot where the animal had vanished, as if hoping to catch another glimpse of this remarkable visitor. President Traoré, still standing near the platform where the encounter had taken place, finally broke the silence that had enveloped the gathering. His voice carried clearly across the hushed crowd as he addressed the significance of what they had all experienced together. "My fellow Burkinabé," he began, "we have witnessed something that reminds us of our deep connection to this land and its sacred heritage. Let us carry forward the spirit of courage and dignity that our visitor has shown us today." In the immediate aftermath of the lion's departure, the crowd's energy underwent another dramatic transformation. What had been reverent silence erupted into animated discussions as thousands of people began sharing their interpretations of the extraordinary encounter they had just witnessed. Traditional leaders, religious figures, and ordinary citizens engaged in passionate debates about the meaning and implications of what many were already calling a divine visitation. Elder Amidou Kaboré, a respected traditional chief from the Mossi community, was among the first to offer a formal interpretation. Standing before a gathered crowd of journalists and community members, he declared, "In our tradition, the lion appears only to acknowledge the legitimacy of true leadership. What we have seen today is the ancestors' blessing upon President Traoré's authority." His words resonated powerfully through the crowd, where similar interpretations were emerging from multiple cultural perspectives. Fulani spiritual leaders spoke of ancient prophecies regarding lions that would appear to herald a new age of African independence. Bobo elders referenced traditional stories of lions blessing righteous kings during times of great change and challenge. The convergence of these various cultural narratives created a powerful consensus that transcended ethnic and regional division. Rarely had such diverse communities within Burkina Faso found such unity in interpreting a single event. But the lion's appearance had provided a shared symbolic experience that spoke to deep cultural values spanning different traditions. Social media platforms immediately exploded with posts, photos, and videos of the encounter, spreading news of the event far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The hashtag #LionBlessing began trending across Francophone Africa as people shared their own interpretations and connected the event to broader themes of African Renaissance and authentic leadership. Religious leaders from various faiths also offered their perspectives on the encounter's significance. Islamic scholars noted that lions are mentioned in the Quran as symbols of divine power, and that their peaceful interaction with righteous leaders indicated spiritual blessing. Christian pastors referenced biblical passages about lions lying down with lambs as symbols of divine favor and peaceful authority. The international media response was more cautious, with many outlets focusing on the security aspects of having a dangerous predator at a public gathering. However, African journalists and cultural commentators immediately recognized the deeper significance of the event within local cultural context that made such encounters profoundly meaningful rather than merely unusual. President Traoré, recognizing the importance of addressing the various interpretations emerging from the encounter, decided to incorporate discussion of the lion's appearance into his planned Independence Day address. His speechwriters worked frantically to revise his prepared remarks to acknowledge the event while providing thoughtful leadership about its significance. When he finally took the podium to deliver his address, the crowd's attention was absolute. The lion's appearance had transformed what would have been a routine political speech into an opportunity for deeper reflection on leadership, legitimacy, and the relationship between modern governance and traditional authority. Today we have witnessed something that reminds us of the deep spiritual foundations of our nation, Traoré began, his voice carrying the weight of the moment's significance. The courage and dignity displayed by our visitor reflects the qualities we must embody as we build our independent future. He continued by connecting the lion's peaceful presence to themes of strength without aggression, leadership without domination, and the harmony between human authority and natural order that characterized traditional African governance. His words resonated powerfully with an audience already primed to see deep meaning in the day's events. Just as this magnificent creature showed us respect while maintaining its dignity, we must engage with the world from a position of strength and self-respect, he declared. We seek peaceful cooperation with all nations, but we will not bow to any external authority that fails to recognize our sovereignty. The crowd's response was electric, with sustained applause and chanting that demonstrated how effectively he had connected the lion's symbolic message to contemporary political challenges. The encounter had provided him with a powerful metaphor for his administration's approach to international relations: strong but not aggressive, dignified but not subservient. International observers noted how skillfully Traoré had managed to address the spiritual dimensions of the encounter while maintaining focus on practical political objectives. Rather than dismissing traditional interpretations or allowing them to overshadow substantive policy discussions, he had integrated cultural symbolism with modern governance in ways that strengthened rather than complicated his political message. The long-term implications of the encounter began to emerge as the ceremony concluded, and people dispersed throughout Ouagadougou. The shared experience of witnessing what many interpreted as divine validation of their leadership had created a powerful sense of unity and purpose that transcended normal political division. Opposition figures found themselves in the difficult position of criticizing a leader who had just received what large portions of the population interpreted as spiritual endorsement. How could they challenge the legitimacy of someone whom the ancestors themselves appeared to have blessed through such an unprecedented display of natural recognition? In the weeks following the Independence Day lion encounter, the event's impact on Burkinabe society and politics became increasingly apparent. What had begun as an unprecedented wildlife sighting had evolved into a defining moment of Traoré's presidency, fundamentally altering public perception of his leadership and providing powerful symbolic foundation for his political agenda. Traditional leaders across the country formally declared their interpretation of the lion's appearance as ancestral validation of Traoré's authority. This unified traditional endorsement carried enormous political weight in a society where customary authority remained influential despite decades of modernization. The spiritual legitimacy provided by the encounter complemented his democratic mandate in ways that created unprecedented popular support. Religious communities similarly embraced the event as confirmation of divine favor for Traoré's leadership. Islamic leaders noted the peaceful nature of the encounter as evidence of spiritual blessing, while Christian pastors referenced biblical symbolism of lions as representatives of righteous authority. This cross-religious validation further strengthened his position among diverse faith communities. The international response revealed significant cultural gaps in understanding the event's significance. Western media outlets largely focused on the security aspects and unusual nature of the wildlife encounter, missing the deeper cultural and political dimensions that made it profoundly meaningful for African audiences. This disconnect highlighted broader challenges in international reporting about African political and spiritual life. However, across Africa, the story resonated powerfully with populations seeking authentic leadership and independence from external control. Social media platforms carried endless discussions about the symbolism of a lion blessing an African leader who had stood up to foreign interference. The narrative spread throughout Francophone Africa and beyond, inspiring similar movements toward sovereignty and self-determination. President Traoré skillfully leveraged the encounter's symbolic power while maintaining focus on substantive governance. His subsequent speeches regularly referenced themes of courage, dignity, and harmony between traditional wisdom and modern progress that the lion's appearance had symbolized. This integration of spiritual validation with practical policy created unprecedented political capital. The opposition's attempts to dismiss the encounter as mere coincidence or political theater failed to gain traction with a population that had witnessed the event's profound cultural significance firsthand. Traditional interpretations carried more weight than skeptical analysis among communities where spiritual dimensions of leadership remained central to political legitimacy. Economic development projects launched in the months following the encounter were frequently framed in terms of the courage and independence that the lion had symbolized. Infrastructure investments, educational initiatives, and healthcare improvements were presented as manifestations of the self-reliant strength that the encounter had validated. This narrative framework made policy achievements seem like fulfillment of spiritual destiny rather than mere administrative success. International relations also reflected the encounter's impact on Traoré's approach to foreign policy. His negotiations with international partners demonstrated the confident dignity that many interpreted as lessons learned from the lion's behavior. He maintained respectful engagement while refusing to compromise core principles of sovereignty and self-determination. The anniversary of the lion encounter became an unofficial national holiday, with communities across Burkina Faso organizing celebrations that combined traditional spiritual practices with modern political commemoration. These grassroots observances demonstrated how deeply the event had penetrated popular consciousness and collective memory. Academic studies of the encounter focused on its role in legitimizing political authority through traditional cultural framework. Political scientists noted how the event had provided Traoré with a form of charismatic authority that transcended normal democratic mandates, creating unprecedented popular support for his administration's policies. Wildlife experts continued studying the unprecedented behavior of a lion appearing peacefully at a large human gathering. While various theories emerged about the animal's motivations and the circumstances that led to the encounter, no scientific explanation could fully account for the remarkable calmness and apparent purposefulness of the lion's behavior. Cultural anthropologists documented how different ethnic and religious communities within Burkina Faso had found common ground in interpreting the encounter's significance. The shared symbolic experience had created new forms of national unity that transcended traditional divisions, contributing to unprecedented social cohesion around Traoré's leadership. The encounter's legacy extended beyond Burkina Faso's borders, as other African leaders began seeking similar forms of spiritual validation for their authority. However, attempts to manufacture comparable symbolic moments proved unsuccessful, highlighting the unique and unreproducible nature of the original encounter. 10 years later, the lion encounter remained the most referenced moment of Traoré's presidency, symbolizing the harmony between traditional wisdom and modern governance that characterized his administration. The event had demonstrated how authentic African leadership could draw strength from cultural roots while engaging effectively with contemporary challenges, providing a model that inspired similar approaches across the continent. For the thousands of Burkinabe who witnessed the encounter, it remained a source of national pride and spiritual confirmation that their country possessed unique blessings and destined greatness. The memory of watching their president peacefully acknowledge a lion's presence continued to inspire confidence in their nation's ability to chart its own course with dignity and strength.